Recording in progress.
Oh, so prepared.
So,
I wrote notes down.
I have good stuff.
You do have.
This is a
Please, what
test,
volume?
and we are testing our volume 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Phil Stasek, and I would like to welcome you to another event for the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. This is our first meeting for June. Our meetings are always on the first Thursday of each month, so we want to welcome you to our first Thursday event, Your Vote, Your Voice. Now, we're in a hybrid setting tonight. We're doing both Zoom for those of you that can't attend, and it'll be recorded for YouTube viewing later. So we welcome all of you that are viewing remotely. And we also want to welcome everyone that's at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship near Pineda. And we thank you all for being there tonight. Our presentation tonight is critically important, and it cuts to the very core of democracy. We understand that democracy works when when each citizen has a vote. One person, one vote. It's a fair system, and it has worked for us for 250 years. Only recently have we found people really challenging whether our system works. And I think that it's important for us tonight to get real about the power and importance of democracy. We have a panel of 4 speakers, 3 of whom are live there at the fellowship, 1 that is with us here on Zoom. First speaker tonight will be Tim Bobanek. He is the Brevard County Supervisor of Elections. A round of applause for Tim. Our next speaker will be Pam Castellana. She is the chair of the Brevard County Democratic Executive Committee. On the Zoom, we have Jason Garcia. He's an investigative journalist with the Orlando Sentinel and an accomplished podcaster. A round of applause for Jason. Jason, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Suzanne Taylor. She's the president of the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast. Round of applause. And the League of Women Voters is a wonderful voice for democracy here on the Space Coast. If you, for any of you that want to know more about this, even before we begin tonight, I encourage you, consider being a member of the League of Women Voters. Consider subscribing to the Orlando Sentinel and checking out Jason's podcast. Volunteer if you can for whatever candidate you like. Consider donating to candidates or to issues of your choosing. And with Tim, I'll tell you what, one thing that is always needed are volunteers to work at our polls, people that are willing to be involved in the system to help. So everybody can use your involvement to make our democracy stronger. What I'd like to do is I'm going to hand over to our Vice President, Bonnie Ida. She has a few announcements to make, and we'll pick it up from there. So Bonnie, you have the mic.
I think I have to get down here. I just want to say we're so happy to have you here. Whatever you learn here, we want you to share elsewhere. So a big thank you to all of you. Thank you to this wonderful fellowship, and thank you to Art, who's handling all this complicated technology. I think Phil's got most of the announcements for you, so I'm anxious to see this program start. Enjoy.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. And I want to say thanks to Jan Moran and the entire Action Projects Committee to bring these events to the public. We really appreciate the effort. We really do. Thank you for that, Jan. The Space Coast Progressive Alliance next event will be called Vote Smart, Ballot Measures Explained. And that will be kind of on a unique date for us because the first Thursday of July is a little too close to the 4th of July, so we're going to be having that on the 11th of July. So please be sure to set your calendar or mark your calendar for July 11th and Vote Smart, Ballot Measures Explained. We also encourage you to please check out our website at www.scpaflorida.com. For those of you that are interested in becoming members of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, we always encourage that. We always welcome members. You do not have to be a member. You do not have to pay anything to come and join our meetings, to be involved in our organization. We appreciate everyone that's willing to contribute. For a student, the fee is $10 per year. Membership for adults, $25. For a family, $35. For those of you that are in the live venue, in the back of the room, there is a table with our SCPA t-shirts, and they are free tonight. So if you join, as is always the case, if you join, you get a free t-shirt in hopefully the right size. But those that are at the venue this evening and future members will get free t-shirts. So they're right there in the back of the room. If, before you leave, you want a t-shirt, be sure to go pick one up. Tonight's action items will be recommended by our speakers. Again, we have 4 speakers tonight, so we ask each of the 4 speakers, please consider what items you would like our viewers, our live guests to take. Action is really important. It's one thing to watch a program like this to learn, but unless you take action, we really have wasted our time. So action items, each of our guests, please think of what kind of action item that you would like, or action items you'd like our guests to take. We will be having a Q&A at the end of our program, or after our speakers talk. So everybody in the room and those that are with us on Zoom can ask questions of our panelists. But before we begin the program, we have a small window for 1-minute announcements, community announcements. And anybody that would like to make a community announcement, please go ahead and line up over by the microphone, and Bonnie Eda can get you right up to the microphone. 1-minute questions or announcements. If we have any candidates in the room that would like to make an announcement, again, the challenge for our candidates is to limit it to 1 minute, please. But you're welcome to take the microphone and make your announcement. You have the floor.
I thought it was 2 minutes, so I'm even more nervous. Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Smith-Rodriguez. I simply came today to introduce myself. I am running for Circuit Court Judge in the 18th Judicial Circuit, and that's Brevard and Seminole County. And I intended to tell you 2 things in 2 minutes, but now I'm going to have to cut it shorter. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience and a little bit about why I wanted to be judge. So very briefly, I am a licensed attorney. I had a private law firm up in Titusville, which is where I live with my husband, who's a firefighter for Orange County Fire Rescue. And I took a job as a general magistrate with the Vieira Courthouse, which I preside over family cases and mental health cases. And I've been doing that for 5 years. And the reason I did that is I knew I wanted to be judge, but I knew I wanted to get the experience to make sure that I could be judge, that I liked it and that I was good at it. And I've been very comfortable in that role for the last 5 years. And I want to do more of it. And so as a magistrate, we do very similar work to a judge. We preside over cases, manage a docket, I have my courtroom, I write my rulings, I do my legal research. And those are the same things that I'd be doing as a judge. And the reason I took that job and the reason I want even a better job as circuit judge is for the same reasons. I wanted to make sure that the law was always applied consistently, that due process was honored. I wanted to make sure that the opportunity to be heard was still present, which has actually been really helpful during COVID. We've introduced a lot of technology. And I wanted to make sure we had efficient case movement through our system, which is not always present. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And I'm trying to stand on my record and my experience, and that's what I'd like to continue doing. So that is all. Kristen Smith-Rodriguez. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Sorry to cut you short. That's a shame. If we had promised 2 minutes, you should have taken 2.
All right, Phil, I don't see you, but I'm Dan McDowell, and I am councilman from West Melbourne. And it's good to see everybody here. It's great to be here in this hybrid setup. First time for me, I haven't been in the hybrid. Usually I'm in the digital world, on mute. Anyway, thank you for letting me introduce myself. I am also running for Congress, Florida 8, and that basically encompasses Indian River, Brevard County, and a little bit of Orange County. And I believe that the League and SCPA, we're putting something together here in the next month or so, so I'll get a chance to talk to you a little bit about my background history. But I am also very excited. I'm a past board member of SCPA and really looking forward. These are great people. I know them all personally, so except the gentleman on the digital world. So looking forward to it. Dan McDowell, danmcdowell.com if you want to know more about me. I am also going to leave some of these Know Your Rights that I've been passing out. They're very valuable at various festivals and things. People love them because I said, let's give something, hand out something they just don't throw away. So they've been hanging on to those things. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Dan. Do we have any other announcements?
Am I okay to make mine from here, Phil, on the table? You can go to the
Absolutely.
My name's Tim Bobanek. I'm the current supervisor of elections here in Brevard County, and I'm also a candidate, exactly, for the same office. So, thank you very much. Just a little bit about my background. I moved here from Hillsborough County in 2013. I have 15 years of elections administration experience. I've overseen 31 elections in my time frame. And so I'm definitely the candidate who's got the experience running the elections. Back in 2021, we implemented a system called Clear Ballot that I oversaw that does a 100% audit of every race, every precinct, and every ballot. So every ballot that you feed through one of our certified tabulators, we feed a second time through in a completely independent audit system, which gives us, I call it the gold standard for election integrity. And since every elections that we've run since we've implemented the system, we've had nothing less than 99.99% accuracy in all of our elections. And so we're very pleased with the results of that. So it's my pleasure to be your supervisor of elections and hope to continue doing so.
Thank you, Tim. Do we have any other announcements in the room? And by the way, if somebody online, if somebody on the Zoom platform has an announcement, please go to the little reaction button. Click that reaction button, and then there's a little button that says raise hand. And if you could do that, raise your hand, and then you'll move right to the top of the list. We can put you up and have you make your announcement.
Do you see me?
Yes.
Phil?
Do you have an announcement, Bonnie?
Yes, I do. At the back of the room is the Right to Clean Water petitions. If you have not signed it, please do. There's literature about it. It's to put the right to clean water. We want it to be an amendment to the state constitution. Put it on the ballot so that can happen for 26. We need millions of signatures, so please sign. Thank you. Right back there.
And that's a perfect segue. Phil, if he could do his from here, I could do, I look like I'm under the table, but I'm not.
If you have an announcement, you got it.
I do. So along with the right to clean water, the Brevard Democrats are having our monthly meeting of all Democrats, and non-Democrats can come as well. That's going to be on June 26th at 7 p.m. in did I get the date right, Michelle? At the County Commission Chambers, Government Building C. And we have a guest speaker coming from Yes on 4 to explain the amendment, to explain how we can really support that amendment and the best messaging for that amendment. It's been the best training I've seen. We'll also have a couple of candidates coming to speak as well, so it's a great opportunity for you to meet some more people.
And thank you, Pam. For all of our listeners, if you're wondering where that is, if you've ever been to a county commission meeting, that is the same room. And directly across the hall from that, of course, is the office of our supervisor of elections. It's the main headquarters office. The supervisor of election has 5 different offices, I think, up and down the length of the county. Tim, is that correct? 5 different offices?
We have four locations open to the public, and then we have our election support center on John Rhodes, which is open to the public during our canvassing board meetings and tabulation for public observation.
But the main facility is right there at that in that room with the glass windows. And if you ever need assistance, that's a place to go. And I suspect I'm taking your time, so I'm going to let you cover that. Anybody else with an announcement? I've been stalling a little bit. Anybody else on the Zoom that has an announcement? All right, I think we're ready to begin. Well, everyone, I don't need to be the strange voice in the room, but I think everyone recognizes that our democracy is in danger. It is no exaggeration to say that we've seen things in the past 5-7 years that are shocking, that have changed our perception of how we see our country. We've seen threats to our democracy that we probably haven't seen before in the history of our country, maybe around the Civil War. But this is a time for all of us to be involved. It's a time for all of us to be educated. We have to learn more, and we have to know the truth. Our election system does work. It actually works pretty darn well. Around the United States, our elections are managed by localities, by hardworking people who keep an eye on the ballots, make sure that the right people vote, the right people are registered to vote, that vote by mail ballots are counted properly and efficiently. And you know what? Every year, we can have confidence in that. So tonight, let's talk about that. We have four wonderful speakers. As I said before, our first speaker will be Tim Bobanek. He is the Brevard County Supervisor of Elections. Next speaker will be Pam Castellana, Chair of the Brevard County Democratic Executive Committee. Then Jason Garcia, an investigative journalist with the Orlando Sentinel and a podcaster. And Suzanne Taylor, President of the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast. It's time for our first speaker, and that will be Tim Bobanek. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Phil. I appreciate the opportunity to come out and talk to the community about our upcoming election cycle and the importance of being educated and being aware of what we got coming up here. A lot of people don't realize that in a presidential election year, we have 155 days of active voting that is going on at any given time throughout the year. And that is because for all elections, we send out mail ballots 45 days prior to our military and overseas military and civilian voters. And then for the general election and the PPP election, we do count those ballots up to 10 days after. So we have 2 elections with 55 days and 1 election with 45 days. Added up, you got 155 days of ballots moving back and forth in between these election time periods. So, you know, for those who think that we just open up, 89 polling places and early voting sites and just snap our fingers and everything's done, it's quite a bit of work, and my staff really does an amazing job to help us keep track for all that. So, you know, my big campaign, my big goal out here has been to be election ready, to make sure voters are educated about important deadlines, dates. I'll give you some statistics, some information about the upcoming elections. First off, we have our primary election, which is August 20th, and the deadline to register for that is July 22nd. That is what we call the book closing deadline. And as a reminder, I'm sure everybody in the room knows, but just in case you don't, Florida is a closed primary state. So in order to participate in a primaries election, you have to be a member of that political party 29 days prior to the election. That's a very important thing, especially for transplants who come down from out of state. A lot of states up in New York and these other areas have open primaries where you can walk in. It doesn't make a difference what your party is. You can just say, I want a Republican or I want a Democrat ballot. And in Florida, we are a closed primary state. Now, in primaries, all registered voters, regardless of their party affiliation, can vote in nonpartisan races, such as school board and judicial races. When you do, so there's, I hear sometimes people say, well, if you're not in one of the major parties, then you have nothing to vote on. We're actually going to have some very critical races here in the primary election. School board races could be decided. In the school boards, if you have more than 2 candidates, then the top 2 go to the general election if nobody gets majority vote. But if somebody gets that 50% plus 1 vote, then they're elected in the primary. And our primary elections here in Brevard typically see anywhere from 25 to 35% turnout. So, there are some very big decisions that are made in that primary election. So we really try to encourage that, participation in those primary elections as well. Early voting will be August 10th through August 17th. That's Saturday the 10th through Saturday the 17th. We will have 10 locations throughout the county. We have made 2 location changes this election cycle. It's the same ones that we had in the presidential preference primary. And the 2 changes are that we are going to be back in our Titusville office. Some of the recent legislative changes mandates that I have to have early voting in one of my branch offices, so we will be doing that. The largest one I have is Titusville. We actually cleared a bunch of space in the back half to make more room. So we'll have 2 locations in Titusville since there is a lot of turnout up there. We will not be using the Port St. John, it's the Walter Butler Community Center. We've closed that one down. We did not have a lot of turnout, and in that location, that was one of our lowest turnouts, and we had to move that up and move that to Titusville. The other one that we did was just down the road, is that we are not going to be at the David R. Schechter Center for early voting. We're just moving to the Scotty Culp Municipal Complex, which is just down the road, about 1 or 2 stoplights. We did that at the request of the city of Satellite Beach. And the Scotty Culp complex is much larger. It's a much bigger room. They recently renovated. It's very nice, and we can accommodate a lot more voters in that location. And all the construction going on with the Schechter Center and the post office next door has made it very challenging. We still will be voting there on election day. There are precincts at election day, but we want to make sure that they know that. And we're going to have signage at that site to say early voting will take place just down the road at the Scotty Culp Municipal Complex. For the general, and the last thing is the deadline to request a mail ballot to be mailed to you is August 8th. The legislature did change that recently. It is now 12 days. It used to be 10 days. It's now 12 days prior to Election Day that you have to request to have a ballot mailed to you. The general election will be obviously on November 5th. The registration deadline is October 7th for that date. Now, unlike the primary, anybody can vote for any candidate in a general election regardless of your party affiliation. All candidates you'll see there will be on that ballot. And we will have an extended early voting period. We will be running from Monday, October 21st through Saturday, November 2nd. So we add an additional 5 days because we know we have an increased turnout on those days. My goal is to try to get as many people, to vote ahead of time on Election Day to try to alleviate those lines, on Election Day. I like to say that Election Day is your last chance to vote. It's your last opportunity. You don't know what's going to happen on Election Day. You could have a medical emergency. You could, have to take care of a sick parent. You can get into a car accident. Anything can happen. The check-in process, the voting process, is virtually identical during early voting. And obviously, we also have mail ballots. So all of them are very popular here in Brevard County. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the changes with mail ballots. The deadline to request a mail ballot is October 24th as well. We are going to have a big ballot. We've got 6 constitutional amendments on the general election ballot, 1 county referendum that's going to be on there for pay raises for county commissioners, and we might have another one, I'm not quite sure, and then we've got a couple of municipal referendums that are starting to come in as well. So like I said, we've got our 3 methods of voting. We got early voting, we got vote by mail, and we got mail ballots. Election day. I talked about early voting. Our early voting sites will be open from 8 to 6 on weekdays and 8 to 4 on weekends. And if you go to votebrevard.gov, you can see a listing of the early voting sites, and you can get a listing of the wait times as early voting is active. So you can click on a site. It's an important reminder that anybody can vote at any early voting site. So if you live in Titusville but you work in Viera, you can go to the Viera office and vote. I would say, just a little inside baseball knowledge, the slowest site and the one that's the least likely to have a wait time is the Dr. Joe Lee Smith Community Center. So if you're looking for a site, if you're nearby there, you can pretty much always walk into that site, and that's just, so I like to try to move some traffic because Kiwanis gets to be like a 3-ring circus at some point in time. It gets very busy over there, but Joe Lee Smith is just up the road across the bridge, so don't forget about that one. So let's talk about mail ballots. We've had some significant changes to the mail ballot process. And I would say the biggest one that the legislature passed is that they wiped out all of the mail ballot requests after the 2022 general election. So if you voted by mail in 2022, if you requested a ballot and you voted by mail, if you have not requested a ballot since then, you will not get a mail ballot. So we are making sure, doing our best to reach out to all those voters and encourage them that if they want to continue voting by mail, they need to re-request. You can do that on the votebrevard.gov website. It's very simple and easy to do. If you do the online version, then you have to provide your driver's license and your social security number. And that's a method just to validate the information that's coming back to us. We verify all requesters add, that driver's license and social security to make sure that it matches, to ensure that somebody isn't requesting a ballot for somebody else, trying to pull any kind of shady tactics on the mail ballot process. The other thing about the mail ballots is that they're only good, the request is only good for one general election cycle. So if you request it now, it'll be good for the primary and the general, but then on January 1st, we go back and reset all of our mail ballots. So in 2022, we mailed out about 150,000 mail ballots, and we had about 95,000 ballots returned. And we always have a certain percentage where we mail them out and they choose to come in person and vote. I don't remember what the number was, but I want to say around 20,000 people requested a mail ballot, but then chose to vote in person instead. So I think that was part of the motivation with the legislature, among many other things, on that mail ballot changes. However, it is important to know that if you're not sure about your status, go to votebrevard.gov and click on My Registration Status, and then on the upcoming elections, it'll tell you whether you have a mail ballot scheduled to be sent to you. We count all mail ballots. There's a lot of rumors that go around that says, oh, we only count mail ballots in close elections. And the irony is that the mail ballots are the very first ballots that are counted. That separates us from a lot of these other states. where you have all of these other states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, all of these, where they're counting days and days and days after the election. And their election laws in their states mandate that they can't start counting their mail ballots until on or after Election Day. Well, in Florida, we can start counting them 20, 25 days. I don't remember what the exact number is. It depends on when you do your logic and accuracy testing. And so on election night, when we upload those first set of results at 7 p.m., it is all of the mail ballots that we've tabulated up to that point, which is about 99% of them. It's all of the early voting results, and then all we have left is the election day precincts to transmit in. So that's why in Florida, generally, unless it's a very close election, who's won on election night. Now, we will always have provisionals, and as you go down the ballot and you have fewer eligible voters in, let's say, city races or special district races, those are going to be closed, and provisionals can be an account on that. Overseas ballots and that 10-day count afterwards can play into that as well. But generally, where we stand. Now, if I had the same laws as some of those other states I mentioned, think about that. We had 95,000 ballots returned, and we had a 2-page ballot. So it was 180,000 sheets of paper that we were tabulating. And if you told me that I couldn't do that until after Election Day, then I'd be counting ballots for a week and a half as well. So, that's what's great about Florida and their election laws, that we are allowed to count those ballots and we have those results out there ahead of time. Now, right now, we've got 57,200 so mail ballot requests currently on file. And of that, and I'm going to have to get my glasses to read here, the small print here, 23,357 are for Dems, 23,754 Republicans, and 10,084 are for nonpartisan or minor party candidates. Both parties have been promoting getting back on the vote by mail list. I've seen it on both sides. If you are out in the community getting mail ballot requests, it's very, very important that you're using the new mandated statewide form. A lot of different organizations had their own versions of the mail ballot request form, and the state has mandated that you have to use their form, and it cannot be altered in any way as far as adding text or anything to it. Within the box. And Pam and I had this conversation. You can reduce the size, so if you want to put something at the bottom, reduce the size of the image and say return the ballots to, and you put the address of the supervisor of elections, you can do that, but you cannot put anything within the box. I did get a clarification from the Division of Elections very specifically on that as well. So it's called the DSDE 160 form. And you have to get that, and that form can be found on my website on Vote Brevard under the Ballots by Mail tab on the left side. You can also call the office, 321-290-VOTE, and you can do your mail ballot request over the phone. So we have lots of different options, whether it's website, the paper form, or calling the office, and we can handle that. If you are making a ballot request for anyone other than one's immediate family member, and there's a whole very specific legal definition of guardian, spouse, child, parent, so forth. Those are the only ones. You can't make a mail ballot request for your neighbor or your friend. It has to be an immediate family member. And that person also has to provide their information, their name, address, date of birth, driver's license number, social number as well. We are required by law to log that information. So keep that in mind as the groups are out there doing this voter outreach. It's best. I'm getting my 3-minute warning here. So Election Day, like I said, is your last chance to vote. You have to vote in your assigned polling place on Election Day. And it's important, that may have changed since the 2022 election. We usually lose 1 or 2 polling places because a church or a facility isn't available or doesn't want to be a polling place. But we also went through a school board redistricting that was unexpected. Most of the redistricting took place in 2021 after the 2020 census, and the school board didn't do it then. They decided to do it 2 years later. And the school board decision was to mirror the county commission districts. So if you live in school board district 1, you live in county commission district 1. And our precinct numbering is 100s are district 1, 200s are district 2s to make it easier for voters to understand. So anybody whose polling place did change did receive a voter information card from my office letting them know, here's your new location, this is why you're getting that voter information card. You can, again, check that on my registration status. It'll tell you what your polling place is, and it'll give you directions. It'll give you a picture to the front of the polling place of what it looks like. So all of that information is out there. And with that, the last things I would say is about being election ready is to keep your signature current. If your signature has changed significantly and you vote by mail, it's very important that you fill out a new voter registration application with my office and update your signature, because that is what we use to match your signature on your vote by mail ballot. And with that, I'll leave everything else for Q&A, so I'll yield 30 seconds to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. And everybody, please give Tim a round of applause.
It's a lot, and that's like half of what I have here.
I think it's worth mentioning that the Space Coast Progressive Alliance has been promoting democracy, promoting elections for at least 20 years that we've been in existence. And many times we'll invite guests from various parties and various entities, and they don't want to come to our events. Consistently, at least over the past 10 years, our supervisor of elections has responded to every invitation that we've made. Both Tim and his predecessor, Lori, when we've had an event, they've come. When we asked them to help us in some way, to inform the public, they've been there for us. So our supervisor of elections here in Brevard County has done an exceptional job, and I want to thank Tim. Thank you to your entire staff. I know your staff is dedicated, hardworking people who seldom get recognition, seldom get the thanks they deserve. And this is a time when we would hope that you would take that back to your team to say thank you from the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. We really do appreciate the work that they do.
Thank you, Phil, and they make me look good every day. So.
Thank you very much. Again, our next speaker, Pam Castellana. She is the chair of the Brevard County Democratic Executive Committee. Pam, you have the floor.
Well, I'm going to ask Tim a question and make sure everybody understands that this August elections not only include school board, but everybody in Palm Bay. 3 of the 5 seats in Palm Bay could be won in August. And if not, then they'll go to a runoff. One will go straight to November. The special election goes straight to November.
Yes.
But the other 3 are all on the August ballot. So that's another really important thing in August. And your signature might not have changed, but if you registered to vote at the department at your driver's license office, you probably did what I do on every electronic thing, and it's like completely illegible. Like, so that signature, if you registered to vote there, is now your signature on file with the Supervisor of Elections Office. Another reason to request a mail ballot with your actual wet signature that you will be using when you go in to vote, if you vote in person or you vote by mail. There you go. I'm getting lots of nods of approval from my favorite people on Tim's staff. So, thanks, Phil. And thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. And thank you, Phil, for inviting me. And Jason, I'm really disappointed you're not here. His podcast, if he hasn't told you, is called Seeking Rents, and it's freaking awesome. I want to talk about the importance of voting. Voting is the most powerful nonviolent tool that we have in a democracy. That was said by John Lewis, who was one of the survivors of the Selma Bridge attack. He put his life on the line for the opportunity to vote. I think today, one of Florida's congressmen said that Jim Crow laws were a benefit to the black community because the black community was still married at the time and they voted conservatively. And no, they didn't vote at all. So Afghanistan used to hold elections. Now they don't. Now that they're a theocracy, and they became a theocracy when nobody was paying attention. They were a democracy, and they became very religion-focused in all of their areas of their government until now the religion runs the government, and they no longer hold elections. It can happen that quickly. And the Supreme Court is currently chipping away at corruption laws. Our own Florida Ethics Commission is now corrupted. I'm looking at how I know that, but people have left the office that were holding people accountable, and now those same people who had been found guilty of ethics violations have somehow managed to bring theirs back before the Ethics Commission to see if to get them rerun with their stacked Ethics Commission. And that's, although you don't get to vote for the Ethics Commission, you vote for the people who appoint the Ethics Commission. And all while expanding access to politicians, for corporations, while making it harder for nonprofits to reach our elected officials. Kennedy won the popular vote by less than 120,000 votes in 1962. More recently, and more to the mark in where we live, in 2000, George W. Bush was elected to the presidency by 327 Florida votes. It was actually decided by federal preemption. The federal government came in and said, we are going to overrule how the state of Florida counts your ballots, and we are now going to say it's over. Now, you can argue whether Bush was a good president, a bad president, but I would say I don't think we would have gone to war in Iraq. In 2000, Florida had 11,774,000 voting age residents. And of those 11,774,000 voting age residents, 74% were registered to vote, 8,752,717. Of those 8,752,717, 68.1% voted. 327 votes in Florida decided the presidential election in 2020. In 2018, DeSantis was elected our governor by 32,463 votes. We had 5,881 precincts at the time. That's 5.5 votes per precinct in the state of Florida. That means 5.5 of your neighbors, had we encouraged them to vote, might have made a difference in that election. It's actually 485 votes per county. Rick Scott's our senator by 1.7 votes per precinct in our state, 10,038 votes. Now, because of that, the results of those elections, Rick, and I'm the chair of the Democratic Party, let's be real, I am not a nonpartisan, I am partisan. But Rick Scott has voted against a law that limits surveillance of Americans. They wanted to curtail FISA, make it harder to surveil Americans. Rick Scott voted against that. Rick Scott voted against the For the People Act, which would expand voter registration and access to voting polls. It would have basically continued the Civil Rights Act. He voted against that. He voted against a national election security system. He makes it harder he voted in that law, by the way, the law that he voted against, would have made it harder for foreign nationals to influence American elections through donations. That law expands conflict of interest contributions, and the law would have required the president, the vice president, and certain other candidates to disclose 10 years of tax returns. That law, all of that was in the law that Rick Scott voted against. He voted against the Women's Health Protection Law, Act of 2021, and he voted against small businesses during COVID. That's 1.7 votes per precinct in the state of Florida. So votes have consequences, right? And it is the single most nonviolent thing that we have at our disposal. And we cannot take it for granted. It was in my lifetime that people couldn't vote based on whatever circumstances they were in. There were poll taxes, whatever else they had to do. I've always taken it for granted because of all of my memory. Voting was just something we all did as a family. And I know there are people who don't feel heard, who don't think that their life changes regardless of whether they vote or not, because their day-to-day life is just as hard as their parents were, which is just as hard as their grandparents were. But at least we have a voice. And if that right is taken away from us, because it's easier, and I know there are people that say, there are actually people who have told me they don't want to ever have to vote again. They want to get their person in power and never have to vote again. They want 2024 to be the last election we have because they don't want this fighting. They don't want the drama. And my great was the mayor of a town in Maine called York in 1624. Like, we are Americans. My grandfather was a naval surgeon during the Korean War and World War II. My father was a naval aviator during the Vietnam War, served 3 tours in Vietnam. None of them made those choices so I could give it away. None of them fought for my right to vote so I could just walk away from that right. So, It's the single most important tool you have. What we're doing right now with Brevard Dems is we are reaching into precincts, and Brevard County has a wonderful turnout generally. 2022 was super weird, but we generally, most of our voters vote. And largely, I will say there's a lot of trust, and that's been hard earned by your office, Tim. And before you had the seat, you were still very accessible to me in your role with technology. But we're reaching into precincts where voters have historically not voted. We're going door to door in those precincts and talking to Democrats that didn't vote in 2020. We're not trying to argue with them. We're not trying to answer their questions at the door. We're creating listening tours and inviting them to come talk to us so we can see why people think that voting isn't critical or isn't important or isn't on their top 10 list of things to do. I think it should be on everybody. Dave Letterman's top 10 list should always include vote. So that's one of the things that we're doing right now to increase that trust in the community and build that trust back for people to know that their vote matters and that everything that they do, every time they speak, we have access to our elected officials because of that choice. In Brevard County, we all know there are some people who are super shady. One example, a state representative 2 years ago called a city councilman and demanded that a school board member be uninvited from a fundraiser or he was going to pull $500,000 in flood mitigation spending from that city's budget. Like, that's appalling. That city, those residents had nothing to do with whatever that drama was involving those two people, and they were going to lose their flood mitigation spending because somebody answered that phone call, because somebody thought they could make that phone call. So we not only have to vote for those people who are making those bad calls, but we also have to vote for the people that answer the phone. Every single office on your ballot matters. Every single ballot initiative on your ballot matters. I don't care if it's, actually Melbourne Village is a very well-run village. I don't care if it's soil and water. I don't care what it is. Every single position on your ballot matters. So do some research. Our website, brevarddems.org, has the list of all of our Democratic candidates that we currently have filed for office. We do have some primary elections in August. And then we will have our slate of all of our candidates, as well as our suggestions on amendments and ballot initiatives. And with that, I think I'm done. We'll have quick Q&A later. Okay.
Sounds good, Pam. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I got super direct.
Thank you, Pam. Very heartfelt, very good presentation. And again, could you once again say the email or the...
Brevard Dems website? It's
Yes.
super hard. BrevardDemocrats.org.
And Tim,
And if you go to BrevardDemocrats.org, the candidates, it'll say right there, Democratic candidates, and give you information. And you can also get involved in our work. We know that meeting voters at the door is critical to what we do. It builds that relationship, builds that trust. It's the most important thing that we do, and there's lots of opportunity for you to get involved in our work.
And Tim, if you could once again give us the Vote Brevard website so that everybody can look at your website as well.
Absolutely. VoteBrevard.gov. Very easy to remember as well.
Easy to remember. And in fact, you have a list of all of the candidates from all of the parties, and you keep that updated. I know that's a great resource for forms, phone numbers, everything you want. It's an easy website to navigate, and it's full of information.
Thank you. And the candidate section, if you go on Vote Brevard, the third graphic down is the announced and qualified candidates. We are in the last week of what we call the pre-qualifying period, where candidates can drop their paperwork off. And then next week, starting from noon on Monday through noon Friday, is the official qualifying period. Keep a very close eye, because things always change very quickly. Surprise candidates, surprise withdrawals. I mean, it's really been a whirlwind this year. So keep a close eye on it for sure.
And it's going to get more dramatic. And there's 2 municipalities that don't qualify until August.
Yeah, right. They don't qualify till a little bit later. Yes, actually, almost all the cities have a later qualifying date after the primary or right around the primary time period. But I did want to touch on one thing that you mentioned. I'm sorry, Phil. The city of Titusville also does a primary. Titusville and Palm Bay, if there's 3 or more candidates, they run in the primary, with the top 2 going to the general if they don't have a majority vote. However, that one special election in Palm Bay, I think it's seat 5, that one, I've been told by the city, is no matter how many candidates, it's going straight to the November, because it's considered a special election. So it's a little bit different. So think about that. That's going to have like it's got a lot of candidates right now. And so that race is going to be really decided at that time. And Pam really hit the nail on the head. Really, it's turnout is everything. Turnout wins elections more than anything else, rather than campaign signs, donations. Turnout wins elections. And that's probably the biggest thing I can say is that, all of those ballot races, those down ballot races, vote on those. They make a huge difference. Those people in those city council races, special districts, county, they touch your lives every day far more than somebody in Washington, D.C. or even in Tallahassee sometimes. So, make sure that you vote, for all the candidates, including the down ballot. And so I got more, but I'll pass it.
Yeah, as you
Well, I
said,
didn't use
we'll
all my
cover that.
time, so I'm going to back up on that for a second. Because we're like frickin' frack here, the tall and the short of everything, and you're just so quick watching. So, talk about voting down ballot. This current state legislature has not met a law that they will not preempt. Like their last cycle, they tried to make it illegal to ban a local municipality from deciding if a statute could stay in place or not. That didn't fly. However, they did pass a law banning local municipalities, not just saying we're not going to do this, but banning a local municipality from requiring employers to have basic heat mitigation for their outdoor workers. Like, there is not a preemption they don't like. Vote for those people in your local elections and then remind them you voted for them. Remind them they can fight for their rights. Because honestly, I see local city people terrified, local city electeds, except for Dan McDowell, who is a freaking awesome human. But I see many local elected city people terrified to buck that system and to tell people, no, we didn't vote for you to do this. And so they just go along with that. Even the League of Cities, which is about home rule, has lost a lot of their teeth. So when you vote for somebody, let them know, I voted for you to do this. Keep doing it. Keep fighting. I will have your back. That's one of the most important things school boards, cities need to hear from you. If you voted for somebody, let them know, I will have your back when you stand up and fight. We see it happening in Brevard constantly. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam. One of the things I was going to mention is that as Tim was saying, there are a lot of dates, and sometimes the dates are hard to remember. A lot of things going on with different candidates. Candidates come and they drop off. It's good to have the Supervisor of Elections website saved as a favorite in your phone, because I'll tell you what, there have been many times when I've been having a discussion with somebody, I'm not sure what's going on. Go to the Supervisor of Elections website. It's a very valuable tool. These websites are good to have as your favorites, as is the case certainly with the various parties and our League of Women Voters. Wonderful references, and if you like me and you're having trouble remembering dates, it's wonderful to be able to pull that up on your phone. Our next speaker is, again, somebody who is beloved in our community for his podcast, but also for his writing. The importance of journalism we've covered many times here at the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and so we do encourage you to support your local newspaper. Subscribe to your paper, either in paper or electronically. It is one of the most important things you can do to support democracy in your community, is to have good journalism, journalists who keep our elected officials honest. And one of those is with us today, and I am so glad to have you. Jason Garcia, investigative journalist, Orlando Sentinel, and podcaster extraordinaire. Jason, you have the floor.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me. That's a really kind introduction, and thanks for letting me zoom in from Orlando here. One thing to sort of correct on my bio, I was with the Orlando Sentinel for about 20 years, but I left a few years ago to found Seeking Rents, which is a newsletter and podcast that it focuses specifically on the way businesses influence public policy. And so that name Seeking Rents actually comes from a term in economics, which refers to rent seeking. And rent seeking is what happens when a business or a wealthy person or someone with wealth and political influence uses that influence to get laws changed in a way that lets them capture more wealth for themselves, usually at the expense of someone else. And I mention that because a lot of what I do is write about how businesses influence public policy in the Florida legislature. And I suspect, Pam actually mentioned one of the most notorious bills from this session, House Bill 433, which was a large preemption that, among other things, prevents local governments from passing laws that require, farming companies and construction firms to provide their workers with water, right? It prohibits that. It's the sort of thing we would expect for our dogs, right? We passed a law preempting that. And a lot of people, I think, know about that bill, but what I think a lot of people don't know is that bill passed by one vote. The very first hearing it had in the Florida Senate, it passed 4-2. If one vote had flipped, that bill was dead, and it was dead for session. And I bring that up because, when people talk about the Florida legislature, it's obviously a very lopsided place right now. I think the margins are 85-35 in the House and 28-12 in the Senate. But even in that environment, every seat matters, right? There are constantly, particularly with these heavy lift bills where you've got the big business lobby essentially trying to browbeat the legislature into doing something that everybody knows is unpopular. There are these pinch points throughout the process where a single vote can make a difference. And so it speaks to the importance of voting in these races, right? And when we talk about these margins too, a majority is not the only thing that matters in Tallahassee. So a really important threshold in the Florida legislature is 2/3, 80 votes in the House, 27 votes in the Senate. So you're talking about a difference right now of three seats in the House, 2 seats in the Senate. And what that gets you, once you have 2/3, right, that gives the majority party unlimited power to waive rules, which sounds like a wonky thing, but it's actually like one of the most important things in the legislative process. This is how, when you lack the ability to waive rules, when the minority party can enforce legislative rules, you can stop bills in their tracks all throughout the process, right? Because anytime they run out of time, that's it. Ball game's over. So, a lot of people, when you're trying to defeat a bad bill, will talk about a strategy of delay, amend, destroy. Delay is the most powerful tool you have to stop a bill unless they can waive the rules. So just getting to an 80 vote threshold is really important. And it matters in other ways. So another thing with an 80 vote margin in the House, or 2/3 margin, if you're below that, or above that, the legislature can pass any sort of law it wants, eliminating local government revenues, right? So we've talked a little bit about preemption, but one step that goes beyond preemption is essentially defunding local governments, taking away tax revenue sources. And that is really a way you start to undermine local control, right? Is you take away their ability to fund anything, right? And with a 2/3 majority, you can pass those bills, but if you can flip a couple of seats, get it below 2/3, then suddenly the majority party can't unilaterally do that sort of thing, right? Another place this shows up, public records exemption. I think probably everybody here knows that Ben Sass was made president of the University of Florida in a completely secretive process where he wasn't revealed as a finalist for that job, or an applicant for that job, until he had the job locked up and there was nothing anybody could do, right? That was the result of a public records exemption that had been passed through the legislature. You need a 2/3 margin to pass those, right? And so if you can get the margin below that, you can stop that sort of thing from happening. Now, there are other thresholds too that matter. So, again, you don't have to necessarily think in terms of a majority of seats, but just 3/5 matters, right? So it takes a 3/5 vote to pass a constitutional amendment. When you think about sort of try and game out what the Florida legislature is likely to do next, if the Reproductive Freedom Amendment passes this session, I think you're very likely to see a constitutional amendment proposed by the legislature that essentially tries to compete with that. Basically, a conflicting sort of abortion-related constitutional amendment that what they would try and do is create like dueling constitutional rights that courts could then use to undermine one or the other, right? But it takes 3/5 votes to do that. So if you can flip a few more seats, you can stop that sort of thing from happening. And so, like I said, I write a lot about the Florida legislature, and there's a lot of folks that when you talk to them, it can feel like a very daunting thing because it's so lopsided. But it really isn't as lopsided as you think when you start to think about the actual levers of power and how that works in this process, and how close you are to being able to change some of those. And so it's something to keep in mind as you look at these races. The presidential race in Congress sucks up so much attention, but as some of the other speakers were making, local races, state races, they're arguably even more important to your everyday lives. And setting aside the presidential race, which might be the sort of most existential race we've ever seen, but these local and state races really do matter, and they have a direct impact. And the only other thing I wanted to mention, and that's sort of in the vein of the legislature, we've talked a lot about sort of the importance of voting and exercising that right. But one of the other most empowering things you can do and the most impactful things you can do is help get other folks registered to vote. Help make sure other people are exercising this right. And I mention that because there has been a concerted effort in Tallahassee the last few years to make it so much harder to register people to vote. And just, I won't go into the weeds in this, but they have passed 3 separate bills in the past 3 years that constantly that keep changing the rules on voter registration organizations, adding new hurdles that are intentionally designed to trip you up, and hopefully putting you in position where these groups tend to be civic groups, right? Where they might incur these essentially potentially ruinous fines, right? And so just to give you one example of how this works, in 3 years, they've taken the maximum potential fines that a third-party voter registration organization faces from $1,000 to $50,000 to $250,000 now, right? And that's all designed to drive folks out of this space, right? To make it simply too risky to engage in it. So one of the most effective ways you can push back against this sort of stuff is by helping other people register to vote. Help people exercise the same right you are. It has an enormous difference. It is what the status quo is afraid of. So I'll leave it there and step back for some questions, but I really do appreciate you having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, the Space Coast Progressive Alliance is, in fact, a third-party voter registration organization, and frankly, we're terrified of the threats that have been put before us. It is a scary time. Knock on a lot of doors myself, and frankly, you really have to be careful, and but you can't give up. It is within your family, within your sphere of friends. If you can influence one person, as we've already heard tonight, it might take one vote per precinct to swing a vote. And I tell you what, voting by mail is reliable. For anybody who's curious about that, always beg people, please vote by mail, because if on election day that you were planning to go, your car doesn't start, we lose your vote. If there's a huge thunderstorm that moves in, or a hurricane that comes by or something, and you can't get to the polling place, hey, guess what? We lose your vote. If your kid gets sick and you have to go to the hospital, you know what? We lose your vote. So voting by mail makes sense. And if you have a vote by mail form in your hand and you really want to go do it, you can walk into the polling place on hopefully early voting if you're choosing to do that. So vote by mail, very important. Thank you, Jason, for your work and your education for all of us. Our next speaker, Suzanne Taylor. She has been a friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance for a long time. We love having her as a speaker, and she has a lot to say. She is a very important voice in our community. With the Space Coast Progressive Alliance focusing on elections and election integrity through the rest of the year, we're hoping to work more with the League of Women Voters. And so for tonight, we welcome Suzanne Taylor, President, League of Women Voters of the Space Coast.
Thank you, everybody. I can hear it now. So in a way, it's nice going after all these people. I learned a lot. I took notes myself. I learned some things, but there's a lot of overlap here. So I'm going to, what I say is going to be a little scattershot. I'm just going to try to touch on a couple of points and not repeat things that have been said, because I know y'all don't want that. But the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We're nationwide. We started in 1920 when women first gained the right to vote. Even though it says League of Women Voters, we have male members, some present today, at least 2 male members, and we accept everybody. I mean, we make a really strong effort for our organization to look like America, and as everybody really should, but we certainly spend a lot of time with that. But we're nonpartisan. We don't support any particular candidate. We do candidate forums. We don't have debates, but we have forums to expose people to the candidates, because the two primary reasons we exist. One is to register people to vote, and the second is to help them get educated. So we don't take positions on candidates. From time to time, we do take positions on issues, but the way I like to explain it is the issues that we take an opinion on or take a position on are issues of fairness and equality. Things like the Equal Rights Amendment. It's not on the ballot, should be. I'd certainly be standing on a corner again, letting people know. Yeah, I think I get some good positive vibes here about that. But yeah, fairness and equality are the issues that we focus on. So I think I'm a pretty good representative of the league because I was on one party, I was in another party, and it didn't work for me. So being a nonpartisan NPA, nonpartisan voter works for me. I get that I don't get to participate in the primaries. It's something that I've chosen to give up because it works for me. And something occurred to me when somebody was talking. I believe the last numbers I saw, maybe this is off the point, but I believe the last numbers I saw showed that in at least Brevard County, there are a certain number of Republican voters, a smaller number of Democratic voters, but a huge number of NPA, non-party affiliated voters, which could be anybody. You know, they could favor one candidate, they could favor one side or the other. So I think they're a force to be reckoned with. We are a force to be reckoned with. So education and awareness are our two most important factors. We spend a lot of time registering people to vote. That's probably what we spend the most time doing. But at some point we have to shift because at some point you can't register anymore because the election is imminent. So we shift to helping people figure out how to get to the polls, how to express their vote, and help them understand the issues. Every year or every election year, it seems there are more questions on the ballot. So we spend a lot of time parsing through the language and what the proponents of a question are saying, what the opponents of a question are saying, and try to put that together in a document and help people understand and get that distributed. So that's one of the things that we're working on now. So a couple people mentioned laws change, especially Jason mentioned laws being changed in the Florida legislature to make it more difficult to register people to vote. That hits us right in the heart. That's exactly what we do. And we're not the only ones that was pointed at. Certainly any third-party voter registration organization is affected by that. What we did and what other organizations have done is to take the power out of that. And we don't handle paper ballots anymore, which as long as we don't handle the paper, that makes us no longer a third-party voter registration organization. We simply do digital. Wonderful website that we have in Brevard. We've been very lucky with our votebrevard.org website that our supervisor of elections has and maintains. You can go right on there and you can register as Tim just said. And that's what we do. We help people find the website. We help people navigate it. Lots of times we get started and they're like, oh, I don't know my social security number or I don't have my ID on me. But it's a start and we register the people that we can. One of the places that we register people is at the local colleges, and it always floors me, and I think my colleagues as well, how many young people say it doesn't matter if I vote. It just kills us when they say that, and we try so hard to talk to them, but I mean, if anyone here has a young person in their family, a teenager especially, it's really, you know, a difficult proposition to try to convince them of anything at this point. You have to kind of hope that they mature and grow into the adult that cares. But we get a lot of that. And probably everybody here is registered to vote already and is aware of all this information, or you wouldn't be here or on Zoom. But it's just shocking how many people think it doesn't matter, as Pam had said. So one of the things that we do is to let people know why it matters. And there's some printouts that are really handy that help explain this to people in a way that they can understand. And one of the ways is, asking people, do you have kids that go to school? Well, if you don't vote for your local school board, then those people that win are making policies for your children that affect you and your children, and you had no say in it. And if you don't like what they're doing, you can't really complain. You can only complain if you vote. And trust me, I vote and I complain. And I try to do something about it too, and I hope lots of people feel the same way. I think they do. Do you have a job? Your job is affected, as other speakers were saying. Very recently, if you are a roofer and you're working in the hot summer, and we're in the middle of it now, you can't be afforded necessarily a bottle of water. You can't be mandated to have that. I think it's like a 5-minute break or something every 3 hours, some crazy amount. I wouldn't want to be outside standing, in the shade for that long a time without water. I can't imagine somebody on a roof. So And I could go on, but there are so many, it affects everyone. If you're a young person and you think, oh, it doesn't matter that I vote, it does, because student loan forgiveness and student loan existence is a big factor, has been a big factor in previous elections, and will be a big factor in current elections. Court system, anything to do, if you have anything to do with the court system, whether it's criminal law or family law, if you have a divorce or you have children that you're fighting with an ex-spouse over, all of that is affected by the laws that are passed by our legislature. So without beating a dead horse, clearly there are a lot of reasons why people should be voting, and we're probably all on the same page with that. We also do only electronic for the mail-in ballot as well, because we don't handle paper anymore. But again, the website is wonderful for that. And I didn't know you could call in by phone, so I wrote that down. That's a new one for me. I did not know that.
Easiest way.
One thing that wasn't mentioned, but I think that everyone will agree with, is that maybe it sounds obvious, but if you move from one area to another, you probably have to re-register to vote. If it's within Brevard County, you probably most likely just need to change your address, but I think that's like the last thing on people's lists when they move. You're not thinking about something like that until the election, and then you look down and you're like, I can't re-register, or I can't change my address now, it's too late. But moving from one jurisdiction certainly to another, even within the state of Florida, you move from Tallahassee to Brevard County, you need to re-register to vote. Again, I don't think it's something that people think about. If you know somebody new who came to your neighborhood, or a family member or friend has recently moved, it certainly is good to send them a text or talk to them next time and say, hey, you did re-register, or just to put it on their radar, because it's probably not one of the main things that they're thinking of. I also wanted to talk about the canvassing board that Tim mentioned. I had never had any involvement with the canvassing board. I knew it existed, but didn't pay any attention to it. Well, in 2022 election, I went there election night and watched him and his colleagues do their job, and I was shocked to say how well it was done. I truly believe it is a compliment. No, it is very much a compliment, because I think a lot of people, they hear the numbers of signatures that are tossed out. I mean, that's not the technical word, but tossed out. And I mean, I heard the numbers and I was like, oh my, that can't be right. That can't be right. Something has to be amiss. So I went and watched myself, and I was shocked at the ones you accepted, because I wouldn't have accepted some of the ones that you all did. I mean, I was impressed at how much effort was put into figuring it out and trying to help those people make their vote count. And the ones that they did toss out were immediately called or contacted if they gave their contact information, and the Supervisor of Elections office did follow up and make some of those votes count, even though people had signatures that were different. Or, I mean, it was crazy. Like one said the person's real name was John Smith, and you look at the signature and it clearly said Mary Jones. You know, it was something that obvious, and it just shocked me. So I just want to put in a plug. I was very impressed, and it was just something that a lot of people don't know. So I wanted to make sure that people are aware of that. I had a thought on the way here. I don't know, maybe everyone else has thought of this, and it just occurred to me today for some reason, I don't know. But like I said, we're all about awareness and education. It suddenly occurred to me, this is the only election that I can remember ever having where you can compare apples to apples. Many times we have an incumbent and a challenger, and the incumbent has a record and you can check their record. The challenger, it's a little harder because they can say whatever they want, but if they don't have a record that you can focus on and review, then you don't know if they're going to do what they say. In this presidential election, we have apples and apples. We have two separate administrations, and it just suddenly occurred to me that contrast. I mean, we all know the contrast, but they have different opinions. But I mean, if you have an opinion on a certain issue, you've got both sides documented what they think. If you think something else is important, like for example, diversity in hiring, there's evidence there. I'm an attorney, so I'm all about evidence. If I don't like to believe something just because somebody tells it to me, even when you use logic and stuff, I like evidence, and that is evidence. So I'm really happy that we have that this time around. And there was one other thought that I had, if I can remember what it was, that I thought it was important. I guess I'll leave it for questions because I'm not sure. Maybe it'll come to me in a little while. But I really appreciate you having this forum today. I appreciate the other people on the panel. I learned a lot from them. The League of Women Voters is always looking for new members, of course. We don't take positions. We just help people vote and vote the way that they want to vote. We don't try to talk people out of a position. We just make sure that they consider all the sides and produce as much information as we can to help them do that. Because everyone's busy. I have a full-time job. This is my avocation. It's not my vocation, and most of us, maybe not you two, but most of us feel the same. Everyone in the audience, I think.
Everything I do is for free.
Okay, well, no, for free too, but I mean, I have a full-time job. I do this after my full-time job, which a lot of people do. I'm not singling myself out, but it's really good to be able to get this information, because as much time as I spend trying to understand it all, I learned from these people today. So thank you all for coming out, and hopefully we have some good questions too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Suzanne Taylor, President of the League of Women Voters, Space Coast. By the way, just in the spirit of due diligence, I guess, there is a fairly large thunderstorm that is heading toward the UU Fellowship. Should be there 20 minutes, 30 minutes. If you haven't looked at your phone, I would encourage you to take a quick look. It's worth taking a peek
We
at.
don't need to look.
Okay.
You're the weatherman too, Phil.
However, it's just important if you if weather is a concern for you, you should know. Check
Hey,
your.
Phil,
check,
I just wanted to clarify just one thing, Suzanne, that on the registrations, if you are moving from one Florida county to another, it's just updating your registration. It's not technically re-registering to vote. Now, if you move from out of state, then yes, you have to do that. But Florida law does allow you to change your address up to and on election day. So you can actually do it. If you come in from, let's say, Panelists County, you moved here, you haven't had an opportunity, but you are registered there, we can do the address change for you right at the polling place or early voting site. And what we'll do is we will call in. If you are within the county, then the staff can do it right there on the electronic poll books. If it's coming from an out of county, all they got to do is go to our voter assistance table. They'll call in. My staff will then pull that voter in. We, of course, want voters to update their addresses before they show up, because it's just going to cause delays and it's going to slow down their process for them, which is why I have a separate table for those address changes so that it doesn't interfere with everybody else checking in. But I did want to clarify that you can update your registration even on election day and change your address, and then we'll get you voting as long as you're in the right precinct.
Thank you. I want to give proper information, so thank you.
And by the way, I encourage our panelists to talk to each other. We learn when you guys interact, and certainly that includes Jason, if you want to come in via the cyberspace to join the conversation. Through the Q&A, we learn a lot. And when you interact with each other, as you have been, we strongly encourage that. So thank you for that.
You know what we're saying behind our hands. But like Jason, to Jason's point, talking about the supermajority in the state of Florida, the state legislature, and if every Democrat called in sick tomorrow, the Republicans could still do whatever the hell they wanted to do, because it is a supermajority. But it's only 5 seats. We need to maintain the one we already flipped in Tom Keene's race, and we need to win 4 more. And I really feel good about it. If you want, I can tell you later who I feel, but we do have at least one state house seat that's very, very, very winnable based on numbers, registration. So we can, I really feel like we can make that difference this year, Jason. And I will say also, I think sometimes the reason people think voting doesn't matter, in 2001, the state of Florida voted 83%, I think, for an amendment to limit class sizes in our schools. And they were very smart in the wording of this amendment, they required the legislature to fund it. And they had 10 years to fully fund that class size amendment. I've got teachers in the room and they're looking at me like, yeah, we remember. And in 2011, when they realized they weren't going to be able to fund it, they rewrote the requirements of the law. They changed core classes. There were 863 core classes that fit the requirement of class sizes, and they brought that down to 350 something. You can have 75 kids in an AP physics class, and that does not meet the requirement for a class size based on what they did to your vote, right? And that, by the way, every single elected representative in Brevard County who was elected at that time, and one that's running for Congress, made those changes. Mike Herodopoulos, Thad Altman, Debbie Mayfield, all voted yes on making those changes to your vote. Again, in 2016, when we passed the rights, or 2018, we passed the Rights Restoration Act. The Republicans didn't like that, so they changed that, right? So that's part of why people don't feel like their vote matters, is because when people have full authority and have full power, and we don't have two parties represented, then they can do whatever they want with your vote. So let's make sure that changes this cycle. I don't want everybody to be a Democrat. I don't want everybody elected to be a Democrat, but I want parity for the residents of Florida.
And I just wanted to piggyback on something that Jason said as well, is that whole concept of my vote doesn't matter. I hear that a lot, especially in the younger voters. The 18 to 25 age bracket is the lowest turnout of all of the age brackets that we have. And so that's why this year we went out, we did a your vote is your voice. It's a very common theme that we have across the election spectrum. Thanks to my awesome communications manager. She put these together. These are palm cards that we put together for the high school students. And on the back, it's a QR code that they can scan to take them right to the online voter registration system. And when we went out to the high schools, we encouraged them, and we tried to get out to as many as we could before school got out, because the deadline to register to vote for the August primary is before they go back to school. And so if they weren't, we tried to get them as many registered. And my story about why every vote counts and why if you think your one vote doesn't make a difference, I told you I've overseen 31 elections in 15 years. I've had 2 elections with an exact tie in a race. It's very rare, but very rare happens to me all the time. So 2 elections. One of them was a community development district, a special district race in Hillsborough County. It was an exact tie. We recounted, it was an exact tie again. And so we flipped a coin to determine the winner, because the statute says you do a game of chance. So we could have, rolled dice, straws, had a whole game show with it, but we flipped a coin. And because of that, I have a special silver dollar that my dad gave me on my desk, ready for that moment if it ever comes again. I don't want to do that again. That was not fun. The other, though, was right here in Brevard County, town of Malabar, had a referendum. I want to say it was 2014, around that time period. And it was an exact tie. We recounted it. It was an exact tie. So we went and looked at their charter. Their charter says that in order for an amendment to pass, it has to have majority vote. Majority is 50% plus 1 vote. It was 50-50. If one additional person had voted yes on that, it would have made the difference. And we had probably about 10 undervoted in that race, where that was the last question on those voters' ballots. So if somebody says my one vote doesn't make a difference, I can point to 2 very specific examples where it would have.
We can probably do examples like this, but just one more is Paul Renner, the current Speaker of the House, lost his first election by 3 votes.
By 3?
3 votes.
I said that out loud again. Sorry.
Hey, I'm inside voice. Inside.
Well, I think it's time for our audience to have a voice. And so those of you that are interested in asking a question that are there at the UU Friendship Fellowship, please line up over at the microphone. We ask that we keep our questions to actually be questions and keep them short. Let's make it a 1-minute question or less, and that'll give all of our speakers a chance to talk. If you are on Zoom, we ask you once again to please go to the little reactions button, whether you're on a laptop, whether you're on a pad or a phone. Look for the little reactions button wherever it is. Click on that and raise your hand. When you raise your hand, we'll call right on you. So I see we have our first question virtually here, and that is Jen. You have the floor.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I'm a little confused about the school board elections. I was wondering if one of you guys could re-explain that to me, because it sounds as if some of the locations could actually have the voting go through in August, not later in November. And can you explain to me how that works, please?
School Board District 3, I'm sure Tim's like, we could both answer that one, but School Board District 3, which those boundaries changed. School Board District 3 will currently, now there's still time to qualify. If anybody else gets into this race, then it'll change. But right now, there are only 2 people in that race, and that means that will be decided in August. If there are more than 2, then it could be decided in August. If there are more than 2, for example, School Board District 5, I think, has 5 people running? 3 Republicans, an MPA, and a Dem, yeah. Oh, which one? Oh, gosh, sorry. So we have 4 people running for School Board District 4. And that means in August, on August 20th, if any one of those, Ava Taylor, gets 50% plus 1 of the votes, then that person will be elected at that time. They won't be sworn in until November, but the election could be over in August. If they don't, if nobody gets 50% plus 1, then the top 2 vote getters go to November. Does that make sense?
And can I add, the reason for that is because school board races are nonpartisan. We used to have a lot more nonpartisan races than we do now, and one of the questions that will be on the ballot is to make school board races partisan. So we're not fighting enough, apparently, about school board races. We need to fight more, is what the legislature...
That was sarcasm?
It was. I think everybody recognized that. So that's another reason to vote and to answer those questions, to keep the school board nonpartisan. I don't see how it can be made better by being more vitriolic, but that's what the question is. Thank you.
And Jan, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Good job, Pam.
Do we have another question? Or I can't tell if there's a line there or
Yes.
not. Bonnie, you may want to manage that line for me, please. And it looks like we have Michelle. Michelle, please, you have the
I have
floor.
a couple, but I'll start with one. So I love the little flyer for the high school students. I was wondering if they have to, because they can pre-register at 16, I believe,
Correct,
right?
yes.
So if they don't have a driver's license or ID, can they or maybe they aren't working yet, social security number, can they pre-register without that, or do they
Not
need
online.
those?
They have to do a paper application for that.
Okay.
So when we went out to the sites, we also took paper applications. And we
Okay.
saw that. We saw some of them, they didn't know. A lot of these kids don't have driver's license anymore. It's crazy. It's all I ever thought about when I was 15 was
Yeah,
getting that driver's
exactly.
license. And even if they have a learner's permit and they're 16, they can still use that as well.
Okay, but you do have the paper with,
We always have the
but
paper.
the QR is great. Okay, thank you on that question.
No, did you have another one about mail? So you started asking about mail ballots. If somebody calls in, I think this might be...
Yeah, my
They call in
question...
and don't have...
Don't
I
forget
thought
you
there
need a
was some
microphone.
qualifications on the mail ballot call-in, like if you wanted it mailed out of state or you haven't requested one
Okay,
before,
I know where you're
or
going with that.
something.
So two
Okay.
things. One, if you call in to request a mail ballot, you do have to provide the driver's license or the last 4 of your social security number. However, state law says that if you want the ballot mailed to an address that we don't have on file, then you must do the request in writing with a wet signature and send that to us. That is a new state law that took into effect. I don't remember when they did that, so that somebody can't call in if you have your driver's license and get a mail ballot sent somewhere else. So yes, that is required, that if it's going someplace other than what we have on file for you. And we've already gotten a number of calls. Hey, I'm going to be out of town for the election. I want my ballot sent to Minnesota. Have you ever requested it before? No. You got to do it. And the system will prompt you as you go through it. If it doesn't find that address you enter as something we've ever seen before, then it'll just prompt you to print that application, that mail ballot application.
And that's why we sometimes get the rest of print.
Thank you. And again, Bonnie, if you could manage the line of speakers.
Bonnie's doing a good job.
Questions. Good.
Hi, I'm Larry Abdallah. I just want to reflect on a few things that have happened in the past in Florida. Obviously, we all remember, since we're fairly, Bush v. Gore that went by 500 votes with no really...
327.
What?
327.
327. I mean, that's even with no recount, with all this fighting, excuse me, about recounts, and we didn't even have one. But I have questions. First place, just remind me, when is the deadline to register to vote for the primary and for the election? For the, what is it, August 20th? When's the deadlines? What are those deadlines?
To register to vote?
Yes.
The red lines to register to vote, I have it right here, sorry. It is, so the deadline to register is July 22nd for the primary and October 7th for the general. Those are
Right.
the deadlines to register.
So I've remotely canvassed in Michigan. The deadline to register to vote is the day before the election in Michigan, okay?
He doesn't get to write the laws.
I know, and we don't get to write the laws.
But
I'm
we
not
get to elect the people that
criticizing.
do.
I'm not criticizing you guys because I know you don't get to write the laws. The other question I have is that have there been any voter purges this time around?
So first off, and I like to talk about this, we don't ever use the word purge in our office. We don't purge voters.
But
we
somebody-
do what we call statutory list maintenance. And so one of the
Okay.
laws that changed significantly on this was you'll notice that our voter rolls are lower than they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And that is because the legislature changed our list maintenance laws. In the past, every odd year, we were required to send out what is known as an address confirmation request. It would say, hey, are you still here? If you haven't voted in the last 2 general election cycles, are you still here? And if we didn't get an answer, then we couldn't do anything about it. They stayed on the voter rolls, and so we had people on the voter rolls for decades, never voted, but were still on the voter rolls. The legislature changed that to where now if you send that out and if we don't hear from you, and a lot of the times when we send those out, we get them back undeliverable from the post office with an updated address, and then we can, update their address. But if we don't hear from them in 30 days, then your voter record goes inactive. Now, an inactive voter, and I know Pam just asked us for the list of the inactive voters today, as a matter of fact. I do. Inactive voters can still vote, and the voters will stay inactive for 2 general election cycles. And if they don't vote, if they don't have any activity, whether it's update their registration, sign a petition, anything like that, if they have no activity, request a mail ballot for 2 election cycles, then they will go from inactive to being removed from the voter rolls. So that's the big change that's happened on that right now, is that information. And we've always done list maintenance as far as we compare the voter rolls to the National Change of Address database from the U.S. Postal Service. Because again, like I said, my office is the last office you think of to update your address information. It just is. So that's all of it's required by statute.
Okay, and one final question, just an update. How are the former felon or the felon able to vote? How is that coming?
So
cycle?
So right now, actually, there's pending litigation that I believe that the mediation finally went through on it. So he's referring to Amendment 4, the automatic restoration of rights, and that information. The lawsuit was it's very difficult, and it's difficult for us to sometimes determine, the eligibility of these voters. So I actually have a bunch of information about that because I have an awesome communications director. And so on the Amendment 4. First off, you can get an advisory opinion from the Division of Elections if you're unsure. That's a little bit of a burdensome process. So in the mediation that just took place, I think both parties agreed to kind of change that to help expedite that process to make it easier. There is no one single database of here's everybody that's a felon. And the biggest thing that trips people up isn't that they had their rights restored because they completed their sentences. It's those fines and fees. That's the thing that when the people who wrote Amendment 4, they did not, that was not part of the restoration of rights. And so that was determined that if you have outstanding fines and fees, and that's difficult, especially when you have courts who, if you have these very long outstanding fees, these court fees, sometimes they'll outsource that and they'll sell that off to a collection agency. So that makes it difficult. Now, my office has a lot of access. We help out as much as we can. What we tell them is to go to the clerk of the court's website where they were sentenced, and that will give you the information. The clerk of the court can provide that, the Florida Department of Corrections, where you were incarcerated, and the Florida Commission on Offender Review. On my website, I have a dedicated button on the side that says, click here for restoration of rights information. Because and we know how important it is to make sure. The last thing I want to do is have somebody who thinks that they have their rights restored, come and vote, and then have somebody knocking on their door and being arrested because they thought they had the right to vote. So I always tell people, if you're unsure, contact our office, check. We will do everything we can to try to help you navigate through that process.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I add something to that? This is Suzanne about the advisory opinions, which is definitely a route, but there's nothing that requires, is it the Office of General Counsel? There's nothing that requires the state to quickly and properly vet those create those opinions. You can request an advisory opinion and they can ignore it legally. The League of Women Voters of Florida did introduce a bill this year to put a deadline, I think it was 45 days, for Florida to respond to that. So it is something that's available to a returning citizen, but it's ineffectual because it's just being ignored. I think it was something like 20 have been responded to in like the last year. I mean, it's an unbelievably ridiculous number. Right.
I'm hoping, I'm cautiously optimistic that this mediation, the lawsuit that's been going on that, they seem to have come together. We get updates on that because as supervisor, every time there's a lawsuit filed, I get sued. So I'm always a party to either 3 or 4 lawsuits at any given time in a year.
For anyone that's watching this and has questions about getting your rights restored, we have had as a guest at a couple of different SCPA events, Desmond Meade. His organization, the Rights Restoration Organization, has done yeoman service. They've collected money. They've been able to help people who need money to help them get their fees paid. Don't give up hope. It doesn't have to be a difficult. It doesn't have to break you. It doesn't have to be something where you break the bank trying to raise that money. The money is out there. It's available for you. You just have to ask. And actually, you could inquire of the League of Women Voters. You might be able to help. The SOE might be able to help you. The Brevard Dems might be able to help you. And I wonder, Pam, do you have anything you'd like to add to this discussion regarding rights restoration?
No, Tim just said behave. I think I made my opinion of the fact that, Floridians voted for something and then their votes were nullified. I think I made that pretty clear. We don't get to write the vote, but we do get to vote for the people who write the laws. And Michelle Green is our go-to person there. I do think if you want to donate to help a felon pay their fees, I think it was $34. Seems like a really, I don't know where I got that number. $34 might be a good thing you could donate to help felons get their rights restored.
I'd like you to know that Space Coast Progressive Alliance created a fund, and we're just in the process of donating $500 to felons' rights. It's been accepted, to us. And I have an irrelevant question, but it's been on my mind for 12 years since I moved here. When I moved here, I registered to vote, and I couldn't find any way to unregister from my old state, so I never did. I mean, what was the process?
So the answer is every state has different laws and rules when it comes to unregistering. Florida, you have to submit the request in writing to have your registration removed. Really? Now, one thing that has changed here in Florida, and I know this doesn't help you with your other state, and this changed in the law last year, was if we have evidence that you are registered in another state and that registration is more up-to-date or more current than your registration in Florida, then it's considered a written request to be removed from the Florida voter rolls. Oh. So that recently changed. How do you get that information? From the county where they're registered, from an official government source. We can only do it if we get it from an official government source. And so if we have somebody who's in Maricopa County, and we can confirm from their elections office that they are registered, and they registered in the last month. I'm sorry? What triggers the confirmation question? If we have credible and reliable information that we get that says that somebody's registered in another state, then that's where we get this. So we get that information. Sometimes we get it from HSMVs. The state gives us data where somebody's affirmed and updated information in another state, and we get that from all of the HSMVs across the country. That comes down as part of the voter roll list maintenance stuff that we get from the state.
But the most recent one preempts.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Can I piggyback on that? It's another question I'd asked Tim. Can you talk a little bit about, I think it's the ERIC system? Thank you.
Yes. So ERIC, Florida used to be, ERIC was standard for Electronic Registration Information Center, and it was a consortium of states that all shared their voter rolls with each other with the goal of trying to eliminate that duplicate voter registrations and people voting in multiple states. Florida was a member of ERIC. We got the legislature pulled out of ERIC. It was one of the best tools that we had, and we used it. We actually identified 16 voters in 2020 who double voted in Florida and another state.
So hey, let's get rid of that. Yeah.
So, and the legislature decided there was other issues that they had with it, and again, we advocated it. Our association, our Supervisor of Elections Association, advocated strongly for the membership in ERIC. It turned into a very partisan thing, and right now we don't have another database I know the state's been talking, Florida's been talking to some other states about doing some stuff. What's that?
What about Eagle AI?
So I'm familiar with Eagle AI, and it's using a very similar concept, and I saw the article that I'm sure you're probably referring to about Eagle AI. So I can tell you, at least in our county and any supervisor that I know, regardless of any list that we get from anybody that's out there, unless we confirm something from an official government source, which is what's in statute, we don't ever remove voters from the voter rolls. So if I can confirm that that voter is in fact removed or deceased voters, that's another challenge that we have, is we get great data in Florida. You know, my dad passed away in August of last year. I was in Tampa helping my mom deal with that. He passed away on a Saturday. I went into the Hillsborough elections office, I think Monday or Tuesday, to make sure that his registration was canceled, and they had already removed him because they had already gotten information from Vital Statistics. But when somebody passes away in another state, that's much more difficult for us to identify. And so we go through great pains to make sure that before we remove somebody, we know that they should be removed and that they're either deceased or we have confirmation. So, but I do want to reiterate, we don't ever go from just a list of a spreadsheet that we ever get from somebody. We do our due diligence, as does every supervisor that I know in Florida.
And Jason, you know, I was just about to ask if you wanted to pitch in on the rights restoration subject or not. I don't know if you wanted to add your 2 cents worth there.
No, I think everybody covered it. Obviously, you know, it was a policy decision of the legislature to require fines and fees to be paid, which I think folks can sort of glean why you might choose that, especially in a state that does not provide any mechanism for folks to figure out how much they owe in fines and fees. But otherwise, I think everybody covered it.
Thank you. You know, interesting enough, I'm not seeing a lot of hands raised on the Zoom side. I hope we don't have a malfunction or something here. I'm betting that people have questions. So please, again, if you are on the Zoom portion of this program, go to the little reactions button, click on that. There's a little button where you can raise your hand and electronically, and we'll call on you as soon as you do that. So please do, if you got a question. I see we just got a hand that popped up, but we've got a speaker live. Michelle,
Yep, I'm ready. I've got one more question for Tim. So is there anything new in the contracts for Election Day that restricts us from tabling on the location of a voting location outside of the 150 feet, but on the property?
As long as you're outside the 150 foot, that's out of
we
my
can be on property.
Yes.
And they have to sign that in the contract that we can be on property that
we
day.
ensure that. Yeah, we actually, and we had a polling place that somebody didn't understand that, and we had to say, no, your contract says that you were going to allow it outside the 150 feet.
Okay,
so, yeah.
awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, she does.
Thank you for that.
That's what I'm talking about, too.
Yeah, I was on the other side.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it looks like
Great, Phil. This is Dan. I have a couple questions.
Dan,
Apologize.
can I interrupt you for a second,
Sure.
Dan? We had a hand up before you, and that would be Cassie Adams. Cassie, would you please ask your question?
The floor
Okay,
yields to Cassie.
it's quick. This is for Tim. I have collected a few mail ballot request forms, and I just was always under the assumption that the voter would put in their driver's license or their last four of their social, but the way you just spoke, it sounds to me like you would only go for the four, that the driver's license is more required than I thought. How does that work?
So for the vote by mail request, you have to provide one or the other.
Okay.
On the mail ballot. So it's different. Now, if you register to vote online, registering, not the mail ballot, but OVR, online voter registration, requires both numbers. But a mail ballot request, whether it's on our website or paper form, it's either or.
That's interesting. I did not know. And let's see, Daniel McDowell, you're up.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Thank you all for a great job on the speaking. The question I have, actually there's two. One is that I wanted to understand here in the Brevard County registration as a whole, in aggregate, how we shake out compared to the rest of the world. Is it a high percentage?
Well, I looked into this a few years ago. We looked at the census numbers of the voting age population and compared, and we were very high. We were in the high 90s almost. And I don't remember looking at it recently, but Brevard's always had a very engaged electorate. We're always of the 16 largest counties, which accounts for the vast majority of voters in this state. Brevard always ranks in the top 2 or 3 in turnout.
Which is, and I apologize because you probably touched on the inactive voters, which is why right now it's very important, because that was always in the mix, and we have an inordinate amount of inactive voters right now. So we're at risk of lowering that percentage of registered voters as compared to in aggregate, correct?
And I guess the question will be if those inactive voters show up. They may not be here anymore. They may actually be inactive voters who are not there. So this election will really give us our first glimpse into what the impact was.
Well, and kudos to the office, because in the field and people that I talk to, they're getting that notice and they're hearing you. So thank you for that. The second thing that you had mentioned early, and this is for Tim, is that on the early voting and being able to take these, what we call absentee mail-in ballots, and put them in the mail and have them tabulated in advance. Integrity is a big issue, and I know I've heard you several times talk about this, but can you reassure us as a candidate how you separate yourself from that? Because those are your elections.
So I like to joke that I'm the only candidate who's got to run 4 elections and run the elections. And that's a very unique situation, but the statute actually accounts for this. So I am not a member of the canvassing board for the election that I'm on the ballot. So I cannot handle any ballots. I won't have access to any of the vote tabulation equipment or anything like that. I already have a policy in my office that no single person is allowed in the tabulation room by themselves. It is a double authentication room, so you have to have an ID badge and a 4-digit PIN code to get into the tabulation room. And so it's very limited. Only maybe a handful of people in my office have access even to that room. So when you go to the canvassing board meetings, and we hope to see you back again, Suzanne, you'll see me sitting in the back. I'm swapping places with my chief deputy. They've appointed my chief deputy, Karen Graham, as my appointment. The statute calls for that. So we had the county commission chair appoint Karen as my alternate. So I'll be sitting back with the attorney. I can be an advisor, but I can't vote on anything. So I can, if they ask a question or something like that about a policy procedure, but when we're reviewing signatures or provisional ballots and things like that, I don't have a vote on that because I'm a candidate. Good question.
A great question and a great answer. I see Vicky Impoko has her hand up. Vicky, you have the floor. Please take yourself off mute.
Yes, thank you. I have a question about polling places. I've volunteered before, and there were a couple of locations that prohibited us from parking on site, which meant we had to carry tables and all our supplies great distances. And also, once we got there, we were prohibited from using the restroom facilities. Is that written into their contract that they have to provide those facilities for us, parking and restroom?
I'd have to check. I'm not aware. Did we have any of that in 2022 that you're aware of? Because I didn't get any complaints for parking. Anybody should be able to park there. There are certain rules depending on where the restrooms are. The law says you cannot enter a polling place unless you are there to vote. We had this come up in one of our early voting sites a few years ago at the library, where the library was not open at the time when we started voting, and those restrooms there, and I even called the Division of Elections and asked specifically about that, and there's very specific rules. If somebody needs to use the restroom, I don't have a problem with it, but as far as the parking goes, I've not heard of any issues with that. But please contact us if we do, so we can address it directly with the polling place.
It would be nice to know if that is in fact written into their contract, because this happens so many times and you just give up. I'd like to know if they have to let us use. I understand about entering the polling area and all of that, but
the specific provision for parking is not in the contract. This is the first I'm hearing about that. We've sent our polling place contracts out for the whole year for all of our polling places. But again, if that's something, and again, I didn't get any calls about that in any of the recent elections that we've had. But I'm more than happy to address it with the polling places.
Thank you.
The thing but I want to emphasize one very important thing, and this is where we struggled, is if you're going to come out and if you're going to do that outside the 150, save the closest parking spots for the voters. And that's a struggle that I had, especially, we had this problem over at the library in Cocoa, where the campaigners were taking up all of the front parking spots, and the voters who were there to park had to walk the furthest. And you're alienating voters if you're angering them by doing that. The other thing that I strongly encourage, and we have this problem probably at Kiwanis the most, is don't accost a voter. The parking is vast, and that 150 feet's out there in that parking lot. Don't accost voters as they're getting out of their car. You know, as you're opening the door, if you're a female by yourself and there's a big giant man, like if I'm sitting there saying, hey, come vote for me, you know, I've had to call candidates before and say, you are losing votes because your supporters are literally scaring people as they get out of their car doors. So, but I appreciate the feedback, Vicki, though. I do.
Thank you.
And I see we have the Reverend Dr. Hazel Buggs, who has a question. You have the floor.
Right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My question is for Tim. By the way, I am running for mayor of Melbourne, and I do have a question for Tim. He actually mentioned, and it wasn't clear to me, why polling places have changed for some of the voters. For instance, myself, I used to vote at Lipscomb Park, and now I'm voting at Joe Davis Community Center.
So it all depends on, I'd have to look at the specific examples of that. Sometimes every year we get a couple polling places who just don't want to be a polling place. They don't want to deal with the campaigners on their property, damaging stuff. I'm sorry? Okay, so I'd have to look at that specific location, but we also had to make some polling. We did some polling place changes with the recent redistricting. So we consolidated some, we moved some around. I actually expanded polling places because we had a couple of locations that had some long lines, and so we split those precincts up. If I had a large number of voters that I was worried about having too long of lines on election day, then we split that polling place up so that not as many voters, you know, we kind of divided them up to make it so that we had fewer voters that we would have to worry about on election day.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Buggs. We're glad for the good question. And we still have a little bit of time for a couple more questions, and there we go. We've got our next question at the live venue. You've got the floor.
Tim, this is for you. Along the lines of what Hazel was asking as it relates to the precincts, one of the advantages we always enjoyed in Brevard was having precincts local or near the voters. And I'll speak to Cape Canaveral as an example, where we consolidated the local voting location to just one place, as you probably know. And this has posed a couple of problems, at least when we talk to the voters, you know, the loss of friendliness, you know, where we used to go to the library, as you probably know, and the community center. Those would have been two normal locations for our community. And because it was just narrowed down to the one, it's really impacted, I'd say, the sense of wanting to participate in the proximity, as we were talking about, the ease of voting and so forth. So that's one question. It's just to understand the logic that the supervisor, is it cost or is it?
Cost is one factor, of course. I mean, we all saw the budget fight that I had to go through just last year, you know, just to get sample ballots. So definitely cost is one factor. The availability of poll workers in polling places, and then we look at turnout. If we see that we have an area that has a vast majority of the people who vote by mail and early vote, and we have such a, you know, if I've got a polling place that only has 50 or 100 people show up, and a mile down the road I've got another polling location that I can merge them with, and then not have to pay 10 poll workers and have the equipment and all that kind of stuff. So it all depends on the circumstances. I don't remember Cape Canaveral. I mean, I know we consolidated it. I'd have to go back and look and see, because a lot of times it's at the request, like the facility, they don't want us anymore. That's the biggest one. You know, we lost some of our largest polling places. We've had to struggle to keep, and so we're always, you know, we're always looking for new polling places. But you know, I take a look. 2020 was a very odd, strange election, and I can't use it as any measure of how turnout and where people should vote. 2022 midterm election was really a low turnout. We only had like a 58% turnout. So when we go through this election cycle here, because our polling places are set barring some kind of an emergency, but I always look after the elections and we see what turnout was like, where we had things, and then we can look at making changes there. We don't like to make changes to polling places if we can help it, because voters do get accustomed to voting at specific locations, but sometimes it's unfortunately unavoidable.
The second question is more with ADA requirements in terms of the ease of the precincts and access. And I would just say that's an opportunity for review, again, to revisit that from my observation as a voter. And I think there are potentially a number of precincts in the area that may not have ease of access for those that have mobility issues.
And I'd like to, if there's any specific sites, because we do ADA surveys for every one of our polling places. We have a whole documented ADA checklist, and some of the locations that are no longer polling locations are because of the ADA, lack of ADA accessibility.
And who are you polling and when you ask the question?
Who am I?
It's
It's a form that we fill out. It says, are the doors, we measure the doors, we measure the ramps. Like dirt parking lots is a huge thing that, is an inconvenience to voters that are in wheelchairs and walkers and things like that. So I don't have polling places that have dirt parking lots.
So it's a checklist that you all fill out?
Yes, it's a checklist.
Per precinct location?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
I have a checklist for every single one of those locations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think there may be some feedback from the voters that might help provide some clarity on some of that. That's just my perception. Thank you.
You guys. Sometimes you wish that you didn't.
Oh, could you use that microphone, please? By the way, for our speakers up at the desk, please be sure to hold the microphone close to yourself. Suzanne, your mic is a little bit far away, so when you're speaking, closer is better. Thank you very much for that. We still have time for a couple more questions, and I'll tell you what, Tim, I have a question for you, a question that has come up over the years, and I believe we actually asked Lori about this, and that is sometimes when a religious facility is being used as a polling place, there are people that feel uncomfortable. Let us say that, depending on whatever religion you're with, you're going to somebody else's religious facility to vote. And my recollection from Lori was that you try to minimize that as best you can, but as you said, it's hard to find good places that are reliable and safe and meet all the requirements. Do you have a policy regarding using religious facilities as polling places?
I don't have a policy for or against it. It's more of a matter of availability. So, what is available in the area? And, most of the churches have very large open rooms. This room right here would be a perfect polling place. So that's something that we always look into. And unfortunately, every year it's harder and harder to find polling locations. Now, we're not in any Catholic churches anymore because the diocese did a whole across the state, or at least across the area here. They didn't want any voting in any of their polling places anymore. But there's just some places. I struggle so much that we're doing polling place in a fire station in Palm Bay because I have literally nothing else even remotely close in that area. So that's our struggle.
Some counties use schools.
So here's my problem with schools, and we are very much against using schools for polling places simply because of the safety concerns. The schools, we use I think 1 or 2 schools right now because there's literally no choice, and it is the problem is the school security requirements are tremendous. I can't even walk in when I do my Tied Together event where I teach kids how to tie a tie. We have to go through an inordinate process to get in there. So you have this massive general population. Everyone's trying to protect schools right now and having that voting population. So we, unless they made every election day a national holiday to where the kids weren't in session, but the problem is, and they talk about doing that. They talk about doing that for general elections. Well, then what? We still have primaries. We still have PPP elections, and so it'd be great if all of the elections were exempted. So unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at with the schools right now. It's a student safety issue more than anything else.
And I'll tell you what, let's just quickly go around the panel, and I would say, does anybody else have any questions or any comments regarding that the location of polling places? I see Michelle is standing by. So does anybody else have any other anything to add? Jason, do you have anything to add about polling places?
We have several more questions here.
Good. Well, let's get to it because we're running out of time. Here we go. Our Michelle, you were next.
Just one, now that we're not doing so much third-party registration and turning things in, when we're giving people forms, can they send in a voter registration and a vote by mail and sign it with the same date?
Well, so you have to have your registration up to date before you request that mail.
So-
or you have
so
to be
we should-
registered, so you can't request a mail ballot at the exact same time that you.
So we should give them a form to
Yes.
send in the voter registration, then tell them when they get their card to send in the mail ballot.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that, one thing Suzanne hit on the head, and I've been telling the third-party organizations out there, the safest, best thing that you can do, take tablets, laptops, do it all online. If you're not collecting paper, you can do it. You can do it all online, and it completely keeps you out of trouble.
And
Hello, I have a question. How many new voters were registered in the high schools this year?
I'd have to get a number.
Estimation?
I really don't. Unfortunately, we didn't get to as many high schools as we could. We wanted to do that voter registration drive, and we got into a handful of the high schools. We didn't get into them all because of the testing schedule. And I couldn't get in during March because we were conducting the presidential preference primary. So I'd be more than happy to get you an answer. I don't want to rattle off a number off the top of my head that isn't accurate.
That's all right. Are there opportunities for your staff or department to educate young people in high schools?
Yes, so and I've talked to Dr. Rendell, my goal is to get to the high schools. First off, there's a statutory requirement for my office to do outreach to the schools. And so I've spoken to Dr. Rendell about having twice a year, once in the fall and once in the spring, coming out, speaking to the high schools, speaking to the civics classes, government classes, and things like that. It's something that I'm really passionate about, which is why I created the Your Vote is Your Voice program, so that we could get...
In like every high school registration packet?
We actually could, yeah. We actually gave these out to the schools when we were there so that they can give them out to the kids who weren't out in the...
But they all register on the same day. If they were there, that's in August.
Right, and the ones that we couldn't do full assemblies on, so what our goal was to do complete assemblies of the juniors and seniors to actually talk to them, and then we'd all register them to vote. It was just very difficult this year. We didn't get to all as we wanted, so we would go to the cafeterias and we would just set up a table and have a voter registration table, answer questions for them as well.
for anyone that is listening and is wondering about voter registration of high school students, students can pre-register in Florida at the age of 16. And so a student can't register as a freshman to vote, but you can pre-register if you're 16 years old. It gets you in the system. It gets them thinking about voting. It's very, very important for all of us. You look around at the young people in your family and you think, hey, you know what? You talk to a child or a younger person in the family and say, you'll be able to pre-register when you're 16. You could be part of this process that they watch on television all the time. Anyway, it is now time for us to talk about action items. I'm assuming that we've completed all of the questions. Nobody else standing in line? Okay. Let's go around the board. I would ask each of our panelists what action items you would have for the folks that are in-house, the folks that are on Zoom, and the folks that are watching this in a delayed form on YouTube. What action would you like people to take? And so let's start with Tim. Tim, what action would you like people to take?
So I would say the biggest one is that be election ready. That is our motto. That's our goal here. Encourage voters, obviously, to register to vote, but to check their status of their registration, check their polling places, and then get that word out about the fact that the mail ballots have expired, and that if they want to vote by mail, that they're going to have to re-request that mail ballot again. That's the biggest things for me is those action items, is getting the word out on that. And then, the last one would be, thankfully we do have sample ballots again, and we didn't lose those. So I really strongly encourage voters to study their sample ballot before they come into the polling place. That way you come in educated. You're not looking at the ballot for the very first time, especially in November. Those constitutional amendments, somebody once told me that those amendments are written for lawyers to litigate, not for voters to understand. And so sometimes you got to really read through those. Is this a yes, a no, blah, blah, blah. I will say that, and I forgot to mention this, that the wording on the Amendment 4 that's coming up on this election, there's a fiscal impact statement that's on there that is going to be reworded. So what you see on there now is not the wording. There was a recent case that was brought. The financial impact statement that was on there was written, and they followed the deadlines. The legislature the Office of Fiscal, whatever it is, was supposed to submit something, and that wording indicated, pending court cases, this, and that. Well, all of those court cases are resolved now, and so a lawsuit was filed to get that wording changed, and the judge ordered it today. to have that, rewrite that wording on there. So the wording on that, the amendment language is set, but the fiscal impact statement is going to be rewritten on that.
And Pam, you have any action items for our group?
To kind of right on what Tim was saying, and inactive voters won't get sample ballots.
Correct.
So the easiest way to reactivate as a voter is to request a mail ballot, which will also then get that sample ballot, especially with August elections being so critical that if people don't know there is an election in August, they don't. That's why turnout's so low in our August elections. So that would be one. Commit to vote. Commit to bring 5 people with you. Commit to get a mail ballot. Commit to get 5 people to get one with you. And then join us in our efforts, either phone banking, text banking, or at the doors, to make sure that voters also have their mail ballots and make sure their vote gets heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And Jason, you have any action items for us?
Yeah, sure. I sort of mentioned earlier that I've covered the Florida legislature for a long time, and so I've seen a lot of people come through this. So maybe in Brevard County especially, I'd suggest that make sure you look into the background of candidates running for local offices very carefully, particularly if you're maybe talking about a county-wide office important to the functioning of democracy, because sometimes you'll find that one of the candidates is a snake oil salesman who was once one of the biggest clowns to have ever served in the Florida legislature.
Just say it.
I love you, Jason.
Hey, Jason. Jason, a quick action item.
Who we're talking about here, Jason.
Look, I can say it. I'm the chair of the Democrats, and I'm not neither one of their parties. Don't vote for John Tobias.
Okay. Jason, the question I would have is, how can our guests check out or view your podcast?
Oh, it's easy. Anybody can sign up for the newsletter that'll have our stories and podcast emailed straight to you. The easiest way to find us is seekingrentsfl.com. And so subscriptions are free. None of our content is ever behind a paywall. There is an option to voluntarily pay for a subscription if you can afford it and if you value the work.
So seekingrentsfl.com.
Really good.
Oh, thank you.
And now that I know it's what you do for a living, I'll donate.
Oh, thanks very much.
We really, really appreciate your work in that. And Suzanne, your action items.
Thank you. I have 3 quick ones. One is, if you're angry or you have an opinion, do something about it. Don't sit at home and yell at your television. Join the League of Women Voters. Join a political party if you want to. Go volunteer at the supervisor of election on election day. There are a lot of organizations that are there on election day simply to help voters if they have problems. The second is, go to and watch your local legislators, the Board of County Commissioners, your local municipality. Go and watch those, watch them at work, because if they think nobody's watching, what do you think they're going to do? They're not going to do what you want. If they know that you're there, we go wearing our League of Women Voters shirts, and they know that people are watching. They know we share information if something hinky happens, which happens from time to time. The other part of that is a lot of our legislators, both local and statewide, switch from time to time. We have limits, but they limit in one and they just trade offices with somebody else, and they go back and forth, and they just keep trading on their name recognition, which I guess I'd do it too if I was in their position, but it's just they don't appear to know how to do anything except be a legislator. Make them earn it. Make them earn it. They've given you information by being a legislator in one area. They've given you information about what they're going to do in another, so pay attention. And then finally, totally unrelated to anything else, there's a movement called National Popular Vote to address the problem with the national popular vote for one candidate not having any effect on who becomes president. It's specifically, I think, just to president. That's one of the things the League of Women Voters is behind. There's a compact to avoid a constitutional amendment, which we all know constitutional amendments nationwide aren't going to happen right now. National Popular Vote compact among states. It's very, very close to becoming law and affecting our presidential votes. They're like 2 states away. There's something like 18 states have agreed to it. They're like 2 states away from it taking effect. So I'm sorry to take so much time, but I think those are all important. Thank you.
No, that's absolutely wonderful.
Hey, Phil, I got one last thing. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention, anybody in the room Anybody in the room who wants to request a mail ballot, Kimberly, my communications director, has mail ballot request forms. So,
I'll bet Michelle does too.
yep. So just wanted to put that out there.
And thanks to Kimberly, she's actually a rock star. Thank you for having such great staff. I can't say that enough. So just a quick refresher on our action items. Be election ready. Check your registration, your polling place, mail-in ballot status. Study the sample ballot when you get one, so that you're ready, so you don't sit there at the polling place scratching your head trying to remember who to vote for. Commit to vote. In other words, look in the mirror and say, you know what, who in this world is going to change things? It's me, and it's my vote that is my voice. Those words should ring in your ears because they are the truth. Look into local candidate backgrounds. It's easier to do that now than ever before. We had a wonderful presentation some time ago here at the SCPA about Operation Vote Smart. They're a wonderful resource, but there are many others, and it's worth looking at the candidates, the people that are running. Do something. Don't just sit at home. There are 1,000 things that you can do to be involved in this process. For all the people that are so angry about what they perceive as unfair and improper elections, those people probably have never been a poll watcher. Those people have probably never talked to their legislator. Most people do not know who their legislators are. Educate yourself. The League of Women Voters produces a wonderful little yellow folder that you can look at the names, contact numbers. Who are your legislators? It's a very basic responsibility of all citizens to know who your legislator is. Watch your legislators. Go watch on TV. C-SPAN. Most of us still have access to C-SPAN, and you can watch your legislators at work or otherwise. And of course, the National Popular Vote Compact is something to look up. If the Electoral College makes you a little angry, this is something you're going to want to look up.
Phil, this is Suzanne. Can I add one thing?
Suzanne,
I'm sorry,
go
I just
ahead.
thought of it.
Sure.
Somebody said about the sample ballot and deciding in advance. I don't believe you can take those two. That you can mark up and take your sample ballot?
You can mark up a sample ballot and you can take it to the voting booth with you. We encourage voters to do that. It says it right on there, but the law says you cannot take a mail ballot. If you come in with a mail ballot, you can't use a mail ballot as a sample ballot.
That's what I'm thinking of. So take a picture of it on your phone,
Yes.
and you can take your phone and you can look it up on your phone.
Exactly.
And of course, you can make notes and carry your own notes in, that sort of thing. In fact, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, if the little candidate cards that parties produce, you can hand carry that card in with you if you want to use that as a guide. There's no restriction on that. So there are lots and lots of things that you can do to be vote ready. That's very important. This may be one of the most important programs that we run every year or two, and I am so thankful to all of our four speakers. Tim Bobanek, Brevard County Supervisor of Elections. Round of applause, please. Pam Castellana, Chair of the Brevard County Democratic Executive Committee. Pam. Jason Garcia, investigative journalist, podcaster extraordinaire. Thank you, Jason. Suzanne Taylor, President of the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast. If I were there, I would be standing with all of you. It is time to give all of them a round of applause. Please, everybody, do it again. A round of applause. Thank you for being there. The program must not end there. Again, if you just keep this information that you've learned to yourself, then we have failed. Tell somebody. If you're at work tomorrow, you see somebody, tell them about what you saw. Share it with your friends, your neighbors. It's important that we talk about elections. It is important and that everyone feels committed to vote and to vote safely. We have a good system here in Brevard County, and let's not take that for granted. Next First Thursday program will be Vote Smart. Ballot measures explained on Thursday, July 11th. It's really not the first Thursday, it's the second Thursday in July, but we look forward to seeing you there. Please check out our website, www.scpaflorida.com. And for those of you that are there at the facility, free t-shirt is in the back of the room. If you would like to have a Space Coast Progressive t-shirt, and this of course goes for each of our speakers as well, you want to go back, grab a t-shirt. It's a souvenir of your visit tonight. Please take it. I thank all of you. Thanks to our guests. Thanks of you that joined us via Zoom. Thanks to those of you that are there at the UU facility. I thanks to the UU facility for hosting us tonight. We want to thank you for your help in making this happen. And again, thanks to the guests, the folks that are watching this. By paying attention, by making a commitment to be involved in our democracy, you will keep America a democratic country. This year may be the biggest election of your life. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Watch us on YouTube.
Absolutely.
The program's recorded.
Our YouTube channel is available, and hopefully those of you will be watching it as we close the meeting tonight. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Great program.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
You talk to the students. 1972.
No, but people will try it. So we actually have a new procedure.